All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're going to completely deconstruct what is probably the greatest myth in modern technology. It's this idea that one single company builds the machine that powers our entire world. I mean, you look at this machine, it's the size of a city bus, right? A total maze of glowing vacuum chambers, lasers, and mirrors. It feels like this massive monolithic achievement. But, well, that's really only half the story.
Here's the reality check. ASML doesn't actually build this machine. They assemble it. You've probably heard of ASML by now. People love to call them the most important company you've never heard of. But their true role? They're more like an orchestrator. They manage this hidden, hyper-specialized global confederation. At the end of the day, they are a system integrator.
The sheer scale of this illusion is honestly staggering. If someone wanted to copy ASML, they aren't just copying one company. No way. They are trying to replicate the combined genius of 5,000 specialized suppliers, literally spread across 3 different continents. You take away just a few of those keynotes, the most advanced machine in human history just becomes an empty shell.
So to really grasp this web, we gotta start with the light itself. Extreme ultraviolet light, or EUV. This light has such an incredibly short wavelength that ordinary glass lenses, they just absorb it. You literally cannot focus it with glass. You absolutely must use mirrors. And these mirrors come from exactly one place on Earth, a German optics house called Carl Zeiss SMT.
We're talking about a roughness of less than 0.1. Sitting inside these ultra-sterile clean rooms, these mirrors are the most precise objects ever manufactured at scale. They are polished to a roughness of less than 1/10 of a nanometer. To put that in perspective, that is actually smaller than a single atom of silicon. It is literally the smoothest surface human beings know how to make. Just to wrap your head around this impossible precision, if you took one of these mirrors and scaled it up to the size of an entire country, its biggest imperfection would be just a fraction of a millimeter. It's wild! And to maintain that level of precision, they have to be held in a vacuum, completely stable down to the picometer. That's trillionths of a meter, folks.
ASML looked at this and realized, okay, there is literally only one supplier on Earth capable of doing this. They couldn't just, shop around for parts. So what did they do? They poured 1.5 billion euros straight into Zeiss to permanently secure their shared future. These mirrors aren't something you can just buy off a shelf. You basically have to buy into the company itself.
But hey, collecting the light is only half the battle. Actually generating it, that requires physics that turn, well, incredibly violent. This tech was pioneered by an American company called Cymer, and it is this dramatic, explosive spectacle happening entirely on a microscopic scale.
Let's break down the anatomy of that explosion, because it is fascinating. First, you take molten tin, squeeze it thinner than a human hair, and fire it into a vacuum chamber. Second, right in midair, it gets struck by a laser pulse that flattens it into this tiny little disc. And then third, bam, a second, blindingly powerful laser slams into that disc, instantly vaporizing it into a star-hot plasma.
Now here's the truly mind-bending part. That microscopic 3-step detonation process I just described, it happens 50,000 times every single second. 50,000! The timing is measured in billionths of a second, and every single droplet has to be perfectly caught, perfectly flattened, and perfectly detonated.
All of this violence creates a plasma that reaches 500,000 degrees Celsius. Just think about that. That's hotter than the surface of the sun, and it's happening right there, safely contained inside a machine. And all of this is just to radiate the exact 13.5 nanometer wavelength of light that those Zeiss mirrors need to collect and shape into a chip pattern.
So what about the massive laser you need to execute those rapid-fire detonations? Well, it comes from essentially one single German company called Trumpf. We're talking about an industrial heavy-duty beam of tens of kilowatts, and it has to be stable enough to hit a moving 30-micron target 50,000 times a second. It's literally a choke point buried inside another choke point. So let's recap. So far, we've got a Dutch integrator, a German optics maker, a German laser maker, and an American light source designer.
All right, so we have the mirror, we have the light, and we have the laser. But wait, we haven't even printed a chip yet. The actual pattern has to come from somewhere, right? And that brings us to the reflective template known as the mask blank, which of course introduces us to yet another essential global bottleneck.
Creating these plates is, quite frankly, agonizingly difficult. It starts off with a special low-expansion glass plate. Then, you coat it with 40 to 50 alternating, stacked layers of molybdenum and silicon. Oh, and each layer is just a few atoms thick. A single microscopic flaw,
Anything larger than 100 millionth of the plate, and boom, the entire extremely expensive product is ruined. Scratch that, it's basically garbage.
And who makes these? Well, the entire global chip industry is completely dependent on a quiet duopoly of just two Japanese companies, AGC and Hoya. Together, they control over 90% of the market. So that highly complex pattern that eventually becomes the processor powering the smartphone in your pocket right now, it begins its life right here on Japanese glass.
Because these sub-suppliers are the actual true bottlenecks, global policymakers finally woke up and realized that just focusing on ASML wasn't going to cut it. So they've shifted their export controls downward. They've moved from just watching the finished machine to tracking these specific, irreplaceable components. They've essentially turned these parts into highly monitored contraband.
This creates a coordinated ecosystem of controls spread across allied countries. The Netherlands guards the finished scanner, Germany guards the optics, and Japan guards the raw materials. So the map of the global chip war, it isn't just a single pin dropped on the Netherlands. It's a whole constellation of choke points that meticulously walls off an entire ecosystem, node by node.
This complex web of controls brings us to a really fascinating dynamic. The moat is the web itself. And this right here proves why the ASML monopoly is so unique. It's incredibly deep and basically impossible to steal, sure, but it is also terrifyingly fragile at the exact same time.
Let's break that down. It's deep because an adversary would have to perfectly replicate like a dozen generational moonshots all at once. There is no magic blueprint that just hands you 40 years of fiercely guarded polishing craft, laser expertise, and defect-free glassmaking. But it is terrifyingly fragile because there is almost zero backup. A single fire at a Zeiss facility, a labor strike at Trump, a defect crisis at a mask blank plant, that instantly ripples out and halts every leading-edge fab on Earth. The strength and the weakness are literally the exact same fact. There is only one of each.
So the absolutely crucial point we need to take away here is that EUV technology is the ultimate joint enterprise. Let's be clear, it is absolutely not a solo Dutch achievement. Getting this to work requires Dutch integration, German optics and lasers, American physics, and Japanese materials. The whole shebang is held together by 4 decades of international cooperation.
And this brings us to a pretty powerful realization. The moat isn't a company, it's an alliance. Think about it. A tariff fight, an export control dispute, or even just a component spat between these allied nations. That would instantly endanger the entire modern world's tech supply chain far, far more than any external competitor's hardware ever could. The greatest threat here is actually a fracture from within.
The whole world sits around watching one Dutch company, but whoever forgets the thousands of hidden specialists has entirely misread exactly where the true power sits. This interconnected, multinational web, that is the true machine behind the machine.
So the next time you hear someone boldly claim that the global chip war all comes down to ASML, just smile and leave them with a simple question. Hey, who makes ASML's mirror? Because that is where the real story begins. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me today. I really hope it gave you a brand new perspective on the invisible web powering our world.